Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. An article published in Psychology Today entitled, "Can You Accept the Randomness of Life?" stated the following: Despite our intuitions, science tells us that the universe is fundamentally random. This does not mean that there is no order to the universe. But science is telling us, however, that the whole universe and everything in it, including life on Earth, is all, an incredible, complex place, but is the product of an entirely spontaneous and unguided process. When I read this, I recognized that we do have a lot of control over our destinies, but it's colored by some randomness as well. For example, most of the people who enjoy this podcast are interested in achieving metabolic health and recognize that many of our guests provide insights to help them achieve their goals. But have you ever wondered how you found my podcast or YouTube channel? Was it random, a random Google search or a YouTube search? Was it a recommendation from a friend or family member? Or was it just the result of some randomness guided by the universe? Either way, you landed on a podcast with a host whose goal is to help you achieve metabolic health using the principles of my NEST and ROPE acronym. And although I am open to all dietary approaches if they work for the individual in front of me, I tend to endorse reducing carbs as the best way to achieve metabolic health. But what if the randomness of the universe had led you to become a vegan or some other dietary pattern? How would you know you were on the right path? Well, today I want to talk with a guest who's tried both a plant and animal dietary pattern just to provide some perspective. A reminder that although we must accept there will be some randomness in our lives, we must never simply allow the wind to blow us in any direction, especially when that direction is not serving us. Today's guest is Kevin TheVisionary. Kevin is the CEO of Wellness by TheVisionary, host of the Kevin TheVisionary YouTube channel, and I have in my hands, he's the author of his book, How to Instantly Improve Your Health, Why Misinformation and Nutrient Deficiency is Making You Sick. He's on a mission to assist individuals in improving their gut health, blood circulation, and so much more. He does this by encouraging a more animal-based dietary pattern, which helped him heal from many medical ailments that he will share in today's episodes. And with that, my friend, I welcome you to the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that. It's a good
Yeah.
introduction.
Yeah, man, I was happy to find you. I'm trying to remember which podcast I saw you on. I certainly, once I saw you, went to your YouTube channel, and I'm always happy to see, us kind of transform our lives, being open to looking at other ways. I know when I was struggling, doing better with a plant-based diet. I was doing better compared to the standard American diet, but I always felt bloated, and I was tired of taking Beano. And for me, it was all about my belly and my, irritable bowel. And man, I'm so happy I was open to not just getting indoctrinated. Even those who listen to our story today, we're more carnivore, but don't get indoctrinated into carnivore. Your body will tell you what's best. Have basic information. You want to walk away with basic information, do your own experiment, and then decide what's best for you. So I appreciate you coming to this episode, but let's begin by sharing a little bit about where do you currently live. And I know you had spent some time in the military. Maybe start by sharing your experiences there.
Yeah, graduated high school at 17 and went into the Marine Corps at 17.
Mm.
And I didn't stay long. I did 4 years, and then I got out the military, got married, had a son, and interesting thing happened right after I got out the military. Within about 4 months of being married and being out of the military, I had some serious bleeding issues. I one day I went to the bathroom to urinate, and to my surprise, nothing but blood came out.
Mm.
It was very scary because it would have been a difference if it was like a little hint of red or pinkish, or but it was so much blood. It was so dark. It was chunky. It was forceful. It came out so strong that, and I know this is a little graphic, but I have to tell you, my true story, right? And so it came out so strong that it splattered all over the walls, on the floor, on my legs, and I was panicking. So I called my wife. She's like, "Oh my God," and went to the doctor, and they did some scans on me. They took a camera, went inside of me, and they said, "Well, we don't see anything." I said, "Are you sure?" They said, "We, from what we can tell, you're perfectly fine." I'm like, "Okay."
You're perfectly fine with
That's
blood.
what
You're
they told
still.
me. The doctor said sometimes these things happen. I'm like, okay. So fast forward about 12 years later, I'm going to the bathroom to urinate. The same thing happens again.
Mm.
So, of course, I go back to the doctor. They do the same procedures. I get the same answers. We don't see anything. And so the third time it happened was probably 4 years after that. And a friend of mine suggested, I went back to the doctor. I got the same response. And at this point, I'm fairly green to researching and, human anatomy and uh, nutrition and dieting. So I don't really know much. I'm just taking the words of, the medical doctors, right? So a friend of mine suggested that I check out this guy on YouTube. He was a herbalist. He calls
Hmm.
himself a master herbalist. And I'm listening to what he's saying. And he's like, it's the meat and the dairy. You got to cut all of that stuff out. You got to cut out the processed foods, which I agree. And I went all the way in. I'm buying herbs, I'm drinking teas, I'm mixing stuff together, cut all the meat out. And at this point in my life, I had a bunch of other things going on with me. And so, like erectile dysfunction, lower back pain, um, just all types of stuff. And so many of it went away on a plant based diet. And so I believe that one of the reasons why many of it went away wasn't because the plants are so magical, but it was
Mm.
because I cut out the processed foods.
Hmm.
I cut out the sodas, or pop, or whatever you call it based on where you're from. Um, I cut out the energy drinks and a lot of the processed foods, and I was fasting a lot, so that has a lot to do with the progress of my journey. But I hit a cross in the road, and the cross came when I began to start getting like foggy headedness, having memory issues, dizzy spells to where, 12, 13, 15 times a day, I'm like holding on because I feel like I'm about to pass out. Um, those things started happening. And then people were complaining at work. They're like, man, this guy keeps forgetting stuff. I
Mm.
ask him for something, and I'm in, management. And so people are relying on you for certain things. And I'm like, what is going on with me? I'm like, I know I'm sharper than this. I know, but I didn't correlate the two. I didn't put it together. And so that's kind of my journey leading me up to, I guess, what we're going to talk about next. But that's kind of my journey as far as health wise.
Yeah, it's pretty. First of all, when people, you basically said the doctor says sometimes these things happen, right?
Hmm.
And the sort of first thing that anybody checking out this episode should understand, there's always a root cause for everything that happens. So we can't just like blow it off and say, "Oh, it's just something that happens." That's number one. Um, Number two, you had like literally 3 interactions with the healthcare community, and yet you kept getting a similar answer. And I just think that it's important that we think about, even as a physician, I know they check for things that are commonly causing rectal bleeding, and it could be a rectal prolapse, it can be some polyps that are leaking, it can be an ulcer, a fissure, inflammatory bowel disease, cancer, diverticula. All of these things can lead to bleeding, but none of them are things you blow off. But this is the key. Even if you make a decision that I can't find the cause, you have to then start to say, well, we don't just say, don't worry about it. We say, well, let's keep looking into this. Let's try to figure out something. One of the things good about using lifestyle to heal is that, and I learned this in my functional medicine training, sometimes you'll find a solution just because you started to heal. You started to eat better. You started to have less stress. You started to get enough sleep. And all of a sudden, the body does some magical cure. And you sometimes, there are times when you'll never figure out what caused it, but most of the times you will. So I really appreciate you giving us a little foundation. I know you've made a lot of changes, and um, I want to ask you a quick question before we move along. When you think about the man, I love your Kevin the Visionary, right? That's a bold way to proclaim yourself to the world. So I want you to talk a little bit about what has influenced you and your family in particular to become the man you are today.
I think childhood trauma. I know that's, you know, interesting statement, but my childhood trauma led me to be the man that I am today.
Wow.
I had a lot of childhood trauma, different things I had to work through as an adult, right? And in working through those things, I realized that based on my childhood trauma, it kept me in a box, in a shell. And it wasn't until I dealt with the childhood trauma, through therapy, through positive affirmations, watching certain motivational videos, and reading literature, it's when I broke out and realized, like, wait a minute, okay, so I'm not what I mentally thought I was, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not what they told me that I was.
Mm.
And once I put all that together, this is who you're presented with.
Mm. Well, one of the reasons why my T in my nest includes how we think and trauma recovery is so many people never achieve their goals in life, professionally, with their health, personally, because they never recover from trauma. So I think it's so important that people recognize there's trauma, and please, 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 we have a trauma recovery center in our health system with Advocate Health. Get some help, because if you don't heal from that, you will struggle to do a low carb carnivore keto diet. That's just going to be a secondary thing. So I wanted to say that out loud. So thanks for sharing that. You um, in your book, and you may have already stated the answer to this, but in your book, you stated there was, you know, there's a moment in our lives we call life changing or eye opening. And I just want you to reflect a little bit on, for you, what was that exact moment that, like, you felt like this is the moment when everything changed for me?
So I I actually have two of those, which is interesting. Um, Most people could say this was the one thing, but I had two life
Mm-hmm.
changing moments. The first one, and I did answer it already. So the first one was therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of aggression, a lot of anger, a lot of built up insecurity. That's one of the reasons, my ex wife left, because I was just a basket case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it, I didn't even know what the cause
Mm-hmm.
was, right? I would just be angry And then 20 minutes later, I'm talking to myself like, what are you angry about? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm having a whole
Mhm.
conversation in my head about what the heck that was about. And I have no idea. And so for me, the life changing one of the life changing moments I had was when I sat down and I actually spoke,
Mhm.
right? I spoke about everything that I was holding inside. And a lot of it, I didn't even know that I was holding it inside until I started talking.
Mm.
And so I was able to release a lot of the anger and the frustration and the pain and the hurt, and I dealt with it and I moved
Mm.
on. And so that was one of the biggest turning points in my life. And the second one was when I was introduced to the carnivore diet. And the reason why I have to say that is because for so long, and a lot of people fall in this category, right? For so
Mhm.
long, I would hear something and I would regurgitate it. I would believe it, right? And the carnivore diet was or the carnivore community helped me to realize I can't do that anymore.
Mm.
It helped me realize that anything I say out of my mouth, I didn't hear it from someone else, but I actually put my eyes on it. I read it. I looked up different aspects of that particular topic, and then I open my mouth and I speak on it. But before, I never did that. Before, I just regurgitated stuff as if it was factual. And so I kind of backed up and took my emotions out of things. And so now when I speak on something, I know what I'm talking about because I've actually put my eyes on it in multiple different facets. So those are the two things that help me get to where I'm at right now.
Yeah, and so I going back to my acronym, just hearing you talk, going back to that nest, right? The T, we talked about trauma, but also how you think, right? And if I could say anything to anybody checking out this episode who's never had a therapist, relationship coach, a life coach, really give that a try. And you'll see some very successful people. And if you really peel the onion, a lot of those people I have a leadership coach, relationship coach, and it helps you because your ex-wife ain't crazy and you not crazy. But knowing that we see the world through a different lens and being able to be present when we're interacting, those are the types of things that are necessary, and we're not born with that skill. So number
No.
1, you're just not. So get a therapist. My E in my rope talks about life experiences for the E and your emotions, but our life experiences of, you're doing your research. See, even a person watching this episode is a life experience. You doing the research, me getting a master's in nutrition. Those are the things that shape who we become. So we need to have life experiences that add value. And of course, the R in the rope acronym talks about relationships. So we want to be surrounded by people who add value. And sometimes we have people in our lives who don't add value. We're going to wish them well, but we may do a Beyonce to the left because they're not adding value. So
Right.
thank you for all of those insights. I'm also checking out your book, and I think it was on page 8. Yeah. The problem food list section. And many people, when you look at a food list, right? Some of the foods on the list are like staples, right? And we
Yep.
struggle to remove those things from the dinner table. So, as a doctor, I have to talk to patients about, what they need to eat. And the first thing they say to me is, Doc, there's nothing, what am I going to eat? You're taking away all the things I enjoy. So what advice would you give somebody who's only focus on what they can't eat versus what they can eat?
Um, I think when you educate yourself, right? And a lot of times when we hear the word educate, we might get offended, or we might say, well, I'm not a doctor, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. So how am I supposed to educate? When you educate yourself on what those particular staples do to the body,
Mm,
how the body interacts or reacts with eating some of those foods, it kind of goes a little bit smoother mentally, because now you can say, okay, if I eat this, this is what's going to happen.
mm,
Or if I eat this consistently, this is what's going to happen. And I know for me, um, I didn't understand that. So I just ate whatever because I called it food, right? And that's the reason why in my book, I kind of wanted to highlight that point, because what we call food isn't necessarily food. It's
mm,
something that you can consume, but the body has a problem with it. The body reacts to it certain ways. And a lot
mm,
of times when we have upset stomach, gas, bloating, headaches, all types of stuff, we don't realize that that's our body reacting to the things that we eat.
mm.
And so, just getting a better understanding of how the food affects the body, I think could potentially help someone who's saying, what am I supposed to eat?
Right. That's great advice. That was one of the biggest aha moments I had personally, having had an irritable bowel problem. And even we're recording this the day before Easter, and my mom's pretty good about not, like, asking me to eat things that like her dressing, which was delicious, But the reality is, if I eat that, it's gonna cause trouble with my stomach. It just always does. But I used to eat Brussels sprouts and things like that, and I was indoctrinated into, going back to your earlier comments, into the belief that if I don't eat these Brussels sprouts, then I'm not gonna have the kind of nutrients my body needs, right? But they made me feel bad. They gave me gas. They made me have belly cramping. So why would I then eat something? So that's one of the biggest takeaways, whether you're plant-based or animal-based like us. Why are you gonna ask somebody to eat something that hurts them? I mean, oh, well, it's gonna be good for hormesis, and it's gonna make you stronger if it doesn't kill you. I said, yeah, but it's killing me.
It's killing
So,
me. Yeah.
so I'm not gonna eat that. Now, there are people who tolerate some of this, but I think you're right. Listen to your body. And by the way, I want to do a shout out to the Conscious Gynecologist. She has a YouTube channel. We actually uh, Dr. Salcido and I spoke at the Symposium for Metabolic Health last year. I'll be doing it again this year. I'm not sure if she'll be doing it this year, but she has a new YouTube channel, kind of like yours, Kevin. And she did a video recently where she walked through the day of a person who ate a certain dietary pattern, right? And then she had the teaspoons of sugar, and she just would, every time they would eat like the oatmeal, how many teaspoons of sugar? And at the end of that video was a ton of teaspoons of sugar. In fact, I need to have a link to that in the notes, because you don't even know what's your culture may be killing you. But if you don't know these things, which is why we have podcasts, then you won't know it's hurting you. So I think that's a great point you made. And speaking of food lists and things like that, just briefly, what's a typical day for this guy who went plant-based to carnivore-ish? Like what's a typical day for you?
Um, so on the weekends, I'll start with the weekends because I think it's very important. On the weekends, I do intermittent fasting. And so I will eat from 12 to 8, roughly from 12 to 8.
Mhm.
Sometimes it goes past 12. Um, and I will fast for 16 hours. So, nothing after 8 o'clock, sleep all night, which we all know when we're sleeping, we're fasting. And wake up and go through the morning. And I do that on the weekends. And then Monday through Thursday, or Monday through Friday, I'll wake up in the morning. I'll have some steak and eggs. I like steak and eggs in the morning. It gives me a good boost. And then for lunch, I might have some soup. I make like a meat based soup. Sometimes I'll do a hamburger with some chicken or some fish. And then the afternoon, it just depends on how I feel. I might have some chicken wings, some steak. It just depends on how I feel. But I eat predominantly meat. Sometimes I'll have some avocado. Every now and then I'll have some potatoes and
Hmm.
rice. But for the most part, it's some type of meat.
Yeah, I like that, and I'm so happy you said that sometimes I'll have. So one of
Mhm.
the things we don't wanna do is start the carnivore cult. "Oh, you can't eat that." No, if my body periodically, even if I went to my mom's event for and I decided to say, I know it's gonna kill me, but I'm gonna eat it today. Don't kick me out of the carnivore family, right? It's
Right,
like let people do what works for you. Like I find that like watermelon for some reason, if I eat watermelon, doesn't really seem to bother me at all. So I'm not quite that, Dr. Paul Salcedo, I think it's Salcedo, but I'm not quite at the level where I'm eating fruit like that, but I will periodically engage. The key is what does your body tolerate? Eat that. If you want to go off the path a little bit, which, the carnivore path, that's okay too. But your body will tell you what you can and cannot eat. I'm actually the opposite of you. I actually, during the week, I'm primarily intermittent fasting. On the weekends, wife's making breakfast and sometimes I'm making breakfast. So I tend to eat 3 meals on a weekend. So appreciate that insight. In your book on, I think it was page yeah, 21, the body needs fat, right? And I'm glad you commented on that because, the dietary guidelines constantly say, less than 10% should be from fat. And you keep hearing these messages, right? So people are so afraid of adopting a low carb keto or carnivore dietary pattern because of this fear of fat. So what would you say to anybody who's still avoiding dietary fat because they fear it's going to cause heart disease?
man. This is a tough one right here because, like you said, we've been so indoctrinated with the fear of fat, and we think fat makes us fat, and we think that fat clogs the arteries, and all this different stuff. And once again, for me, right, I can only use myself, right? I can suggest things to others, but I can tell you my own personal experience. For me, once I learned one, how fat is processed through the body, and I kind of go over that. So when you consume anything that has animal fat, right, or fat, period, it goes into the stomach like everything else. But when it gets into the small intestine, something different happens. Anything outside of fat gets immediately drawn or broken down into nutrients and it goes into the bloodstream through the small intestines. But fat takes a different route. Fat's too big to get absorbed into the small intestine or by the small intestine, so it goes into the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system takes it, pulls it all the way through. It goes through the lungs and it goes to the liver, and it's no longer the fat that you see when you eat some food and you let it sit on the counter for a little bit and then it hardens, right? So they tell us that fat, you want to stay away from fat because it hardens at room temperature, right? And the average person will read that and they'll say, "Oh my God!" You immediately see your arteries, and you're like, "If it hardens at room temperature, it's clogging my arteries." But we forget how smart we are as people, and we know, right, that the body is 98.6 degrees. So
Hmm.
now you got to pause because if you put butter in a microwave for 5 seconds or 10 seconds,
That's
what
right.
happens to it?
That's
It
right.
melts, it becomes liquid. So even if you don't understand the entire process of how fat processes through the body, I want you to understand this one thing. Fat simply cannot clog your arteries because your body is hot, right? And
Hmm.
so even if that fat is sitting in your arteries, it's not hardening, it's moving, right? Your
Mm.
blood is circulating, right? Flowing. So if liquid is flowing with your blood, right? Just on this one point, right? Because the fat gets converted into chylomicrons, and there's a whole process that that fat turns into. But if you're just stuck on the arteries part, right? Just know that the body is hot and your blood is flowing, and so it's impossible for the fat to clog your arteries. So there's something else clogging your arteries, but it's not the fat.
Nice. I've never heard anybody explain it like that. And what I try to do is to keep things simple, and then help people kind of visualize it. So that doesn't mean that every simple explanation we come up with is always aligned, but this is perfectly aligned. Now, I can tell you how. So I had a guest, Charles Mayfield, who was a previous guest. He owns Faro, which is a company that sells lard for beauty products. So on my face right now is some lard skin cream, which is crazy, right? But when you take that out of, it's solid, right, at room temperature, just like you said. And if I put my finger on it, it starts to liquefy. If I put a drop on my forehead, on the side of my face, before I even start wiping it in, it's turned into liquid.
Yep.
So what you're saying makes a ton of sense, and a lot of people don't have that perspective. Now here's the bonus: when you eat keto carnivore, fat becomes your fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So and triglycerides are a fat. So why do I use triglycerides as my foundation to know if my patients are following a low carb, keto, or carnivore diet? Because your body's going to be gobbling up the triglycerides, further reducing. Even if the fat was going to bother you, it's going to get it out of your system because you're using it for fuel. So again, like you said when we started this conversation, understanding the science and figuring out how it applies to your life will then remove some of the fears. So, and I always tell people that the Journal of the College of Cardiology has already said saturated fat is not associated with heart disease and it's beneficial for stroke. So we can move away from that. But I want to keep telling people about that because I think it's so important to remove those fears. And unfortunately, many people who are conventionally trained have not gotten the memo. So our goal is to
Yep.
give them, and that's why I threw in the Journal of the College of Cardiology, because I know they need that scientific data to clarify what we're saying. So we did a video short, and you shared your thoughts on how humans process plants differently than ruminant animals. And in your book, you have a chapter, the plant-based myth, right? And I know we both started our journey with, from the SAD diet to the plant-based diet, and now we're kind of in the animal-based diet. And I know there's a narrative, particularly in communities of color. I mean, the number of people who come to my clinic who are African American, and they're so excited because, Doc, you're gonna love it. I'm doing plant-based. So the narrative in the communities of color, and probably even beyond, because that's kind of like the standard, is you can only be healthy with a plant-based methodology, right? Are there any additional myths about this plant-based ideology you'd like to share with my audience?
Yes. So the first thing I want to say is I commend anybody who's trying, right? I commend anybody who's taking an effort to improve their health in any type of format, right?
Yep.
Because that's leaps and bounds compared to someone's that just, throws their hands up and or just not even take the opportunity to think of a alternative route, right? And so this is never, for me, it's never a us versus them. It's never a I think I'm better than you, you're not intelligent. It's never about that, right? And so I kind of wanted to put that out there because a lot of times I'll do videos where I'm talking about a certain topic, but I'll use a remix or I'll use something from a herbalist or someone in the plant-based community, and people get upset at me and they're like, "Oh, you're hating on this guy," and I'm like, "Whoa, pause, okay? I'm not hating. I'm stating facts, right? And I'm making a point." So a half truth is a lie,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how you want to look at it, because
Mm.
it's not the full story, right? And so they might be innocent in what they're saying, right? But it's still a half truth. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things that a lot of people in the plant-based community, when I was there, including myself, doesn't understand is that when it comes to nutrient absorption, right, the human body does not have the ability to absorb the proper nutrients that the body needs from plants only,
Mm-hmm.
right? Do you get some nutrients? Absolutely. But it lacks proper nutrients from the standpoint of there are some nutrients that totally 100% completely does not exist in plants, right? So some of those nutrients are heme iron, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plant iron and animal iron are light years apart, right? Heme iron, if you've never heard of it, it's HEME, heme iron. If you've never heard of it, I advise you to go look it up, right? Vitamin D3. I hear people say this all the time. Just go out in the sun. Go get your vitamins. Go sit in the sun. Go get some sun today. Well, the sun doesn't give you vitamin. Okay. Sorry to burst somebody's bubble, but if you're hearing this and you didn't notice, and please go look up what I'm saying, right? The sun does not give you vitamin D, right? The body makes vitamin D by the sun making interaction with the skin, right? Or the body. That's how vitamin D is processed. So if you're not eating a proper diet, you're not getting vitamin D efficiently, right? And so there's a lot of people that are vitamin D deficient. And they're like, I don't understand. I eat a pretty healthy, diet. Why am I vitamin D deficient? You're vitamin D deficient not because you're not in the sun, but because you're not eating the proper foods to convert the vitamin D. Um, and that would be vitamin D3, right? You have creatine, you have DHA, and so those are some of the things that you have retinol, which is highly important for eyesight, daytime eyesight. Um, it's amazing when I started a carnivore diet or started adding predominantly meat into my diet, my eyesight improved. And I understand why my eyesight improved was because I was getting retinol in my diet, right? And so there's a lot of things that the body absolutely needs and cannot get from eating fruits and plants. And I'll say one more thing. I heard someone say the fastest way for you to get healthy is to go on a all fruit diet. And they said that fruits have everything that the body needs. You don't need to eat anything else other than fruits.
Mm.
Wait a second.
Mm.
Is that a true statement? No, it's
No,
not.
it's not. Not even close. Fruit,
And
fruit's
you might,
about fruit's like 85% sugar. I mean,
if
it's not, I mean, who would take a diet where it's like 80+% sugar and consider that? And the amount of fat in fruit is so small, and you have essential fatty acids, and you need essential amino acids. So what person that statement falls flat on its face, yes. And they have
but so many people,
fruitarians.
yeah, you should see the comments though. There's so many
Yeah.
people that are like, thank you. This is good information. Really appreciate it. Keep on teaching. And it's like, what are you talking about? You're being
Yeah.
led astray. And so,
Yeah.
you know, you feel good in the beginning, but down the road, your body's going to say, hey, listen, hey, listen,
Mm-mm.
we're
Yeah.
missing some stuff here.
You're missing a ton, and you get a lot of quick fuel from fruit energy, right? And anybody, if you want to do an experiment, and you want to just eat fruit for breakfast only, it's highly probable that within an hour or two you're going to be starving. So you have to understand your body uh, may enjoy fruit, but in terms of all the nutrients you need, that is it's totally not a sufficient diet. So I think everything you're saying is true. And I never, so you're saying things I hadn't heard the way you're expressing it. And you're saying, oh, the sun doesn't make vitamin D. And so you're right. I mean, there's some pre-vitamin D that has to be converted to active vitamin D. Now that's where the sun helps. But if you don't have the pre-vitamin D from your diet, then you're not going to get the vitamins that you need. So, or the active form. So, and I don't know, I remember when I was a kid, man, my mom used to have that cod liver oil every day. But we also know that you get the form of vitamin D that's going to be sufficient for your body from things like salmon and tuna and things like that. I do not get my vitamin D from some orange juice anymore. You can get it from dairy. So there are things you can do. Sardines, beef liver, there's sources, but you're right. If you don't put that in your body first, it's not going to go very well. So I appreciate that. Now that you've kind of made this, you probably were sharing more plant-based ideology before you went animal-based on social media and beyond. So you have friends that you were close to, whether it's through those venues or, just at home. What's been their thoughts on these changes? Have any of them kind of saw what you've done, seen improvement and say, maybe I should consider that, or people are pretty much staying with what they're doing?
They're pretty much staying with what they're doing. So, and here's the reason why, right? And eventually they might, change over. But throughout my life, I've had so many transitions. I've tried so many things because my health wasn't the greatest, my mental state wasn't the greatest. I've tried this, try that, and they've seen me, go on this search for, you know, trying to get better or trying to, improve myself. And some of them came along, and now they're like, wait a minute, okay, we've had enough. We're gonna just step back and we're gonna watch this transition until we'll see, where you land, right? And so that's kind of currently where everybody's at.
Wow. And if you were to meet a vegan, I'm sure you interact with some on your YouTube channel and beyond. What it would you give them any particular advice? Because we don't want to live in a world where we're saying it's my way or the highway, right?
Right.
And I try to frame my thoughts, and literally that's why I call myself metabolic health doc as opposed to low carb or carnivore doc, because I feel like there may be a few paths to get to your goal. I just think for most humans, the path is that they can't neglect eating animal based. I just think that that's really setting yourself up for a life of a bag of supplements, and you'll never get to where you need to go. So, what advice would you give a vegan who is hearing this conversation and they're not sure what to do? How would you approach that?
Well, they would have to look at themselves. I would say look at yourself first, right? Don't look at the person who introduced you to veganism or plant-based. Don't look at your mama, your husband, your wife. Don't look at anybody else, but look at yourself, right? You know the reason why you decided to take this approach, right? And it was simply from the information you received.
Mm,
And you took the information and you probably looked into it or you probably didn't look into it and you believed it,
mm-hmm,
right? But we have to understand that, as people, we evolve based on information, right?
mm-hmm.
You could take that and, put that in anything that we do. We evolve based on information. So what I would suggest is that you just simply look into some of the things that we're talking about. Take some time and look into how the human body digests plants versus meat, right? Look into a cell wall, right? All organisms have cells, and plant cells and human cells are different. And the biggest thing that differentiates the plant cell versus the human cell is the cell wall, right? And the human body does not have the ability to penetrate the cell wall. Animals food does not have a cell wall. So we can absorb the nutrients from that. And that's the difference between an animal like a sheep, a deer, a goat, a giraffe, a cow. They have the ability to penetrate the cell wall of plants, and that's why they get the nutrients from plants. Another thing is animal fat, right? Or just fat in general. The fat that you get from plants is very limited, right? The fat that you get from plants doesn't translate or convert or digest the same way plants from animals do. And so that's the reason why a lot of people on a plant based diet become very skinny, right? They lose a
Mhm.
lot of weight. And we say, yes, I'm losing weight. This means I'm healthy, right? When I was on a plant based diet, my lab work was terrible, right? I did my labs twice on a plant based diet. My iron was extremely low. My B12 was extremely low. My vitamin D was extremely low. My red blood cells was extremely low. My lymphatic system was jacked up. My testosterone was extremely low. My white blood cells was extremely low, right? And the reason why I'm quoting this off the top of my head is because I spent a lot of time looking at this stuff, trying to understand, right? And I can see it plain as day. Everything in red. I had like 7 or 8 things red, meaning that it was dangerously low.
Mhm.
My red blood count was like 2,500 or 2.5 out of what is it, 8 to 10,000 or 12,000.
Yeah,
That's extremely low.
it's just not, yeah.
And so I just had my labs done 2 weeks ago, right? For the first time in about 2 years. I wanted to wait. When I transitioned to this diet, I wanted to wait to kind of give myself enough time
Mhm.
to heal, absorb the nutrients, store the nutrients, right? And so I went back to get my labs done, and everything is through the roof.
Mhm.
My B12 is through the roof. My red blood cells through the roof. My iron through the roof. The only thing that hasn't improved as much as I thought was my white blood count,
Mhm.
which that's immunity. That's a little bit more complicated than the
Mhm.
red blood count.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'll take that as a win, right?
Yeah. And the white blood count historically tends to be a little lower for African Americans than Caucasian and others. So, you know, does that mean that's normal for us, or does it mean there's a problem? We're, to
Mhm.
be determined. But it's so common that when we see a point drop, when it goes from 4 to 3, for example, it doesn't really catch our attention in African Americans. So that may be a factor. But everything you mentioned, man, we talked about, again, anti-nutrients a little bit in our video short, but yeah, I mean, you're not going to get great sources of vitamin D from plants. You're not going to, good luck with the B12 from plants. And the heme iron is a night and day difference compared to non-heme iron, non-heme from plants, heme from animals. 1 to 3% absorption of iron from spinach or kale, and 35 or so percent absorption from the animal base, the beef, the liver. So it's fairly obvious that if you're going to be plant-based, you can do it, but you have to supplement.
Yep.
You can do it, but you have to really pay attention. All I do is grab my ribeye, throw it in my air fryer, and I have everything my body needs with that ribeye. And that's just, for me, a simpler approach. We can do what New York did, and they have their vegan and no meat days. They have 2 days
Meat
out of,
Mondays or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah, that's what it's called. I was trying to think of it. So we got no meat Monday and vegan Friday. So now we have 2 out of 5 days. Some of these families have limited resources. They depend on the school lunch program. So you're gonna give a kid some Cheerios and some low-fat milk, and it's going to end up being chocolate milk because they're not going to drink the watered-down milk. By the
Yep.
time you look at what's in front of them, it's very nutrient poor, and then it's going to make them hungry within an hour or so. So they're not going to be able to focus and think, and like all that mental fog and stuff you talked about earlier. That's what our babies are going through. So Houston, we have a problem. Just as importantly, though, do we want to live in a world where we force people to eat what we think is the best food, or where we give them choices? I'm okay with you educating around what you think is better if you can prove it to me. But then to force our babies to not have meat options on a Monday and a Friday, I just think that's not the American way. So we have
No.
to get away from that type of craziness. So let's think about how we think. A lot of what we talked about today is a mindset. I got my T and my NEST my NEST acronym about how we think. So what message, you know, because I think I saw a video of yours that talked about the importance of our thoughts, right? Talk about the message around our thoughts and how important it is for us to be successful.
Well, the first thing we need to understand is diet affects our thought. I
Mm.
never thought that I would even be saying this, right? Or I would even correlate the two, right? And so in my book, I talk about, nutrient deficiency. And so if you're eating the SAD diet, right, the standard American diet, which is void of a lot of nutrients, right, because it's things that are high in processed foods, and a lot of the processed foods, because of how it's made, subtract the nutrients, and then they add uh, reinforced nutrients,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's not
yeah.
natural, right?
Mm-mm.
And so you're getting your nutrient deficient by default, right? And then that's how the body begins to break down because the body is not getting what it needs to survive. And so when you understand that, just that portion alone, the brain is a fatty substance, right?
Mm-hmm.
The brain needs cholesterol, the brain needs saturated fat, right? And so when you void the body of proper nutrients, it affects brain function, right? And so this is my personal belief. One of the things that I believe today's society struggle with is controlling their emotions. In today's society, a lot of people listen with their emotions.
Mm.
They don't listen with rationality. They don't listen with pause and reflect. They listen with emotions. And so they respond with an emotional response, right? And we have to be mindful of that. And so when you lack the proper nutrients in the brain, your body and your brain doesn't function optimal because your hormonal uh, uh, structure is off balance. And so that's key. That's something that you have to understand. If you're not eating a proper diet, it affects your hormonal balance, it affects your ability to think rationally. And a lot of people struggle with that.
As we kind of get towards the end of our conversation, one of the things that I try to emphasize is our thoughts, and how we think really matters. And I know that you did a recent video talking about the importance of how we think as well. So talk a little bit about the importance of our thoughts in helping us achieve our health related goals.
Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand that diet plays a key role in our thoughts, how we feel, how we think, because it's based upon our hormonal balance. And because of the SAD diet, right, the standard American diet, which lacks a lot of nutrients, it's high in chemicals, which the body has a hard time processing, and that's a whole nother issue in itself. It lacks nutrients, Sometimes they add things and they call them nutrients to reinforce certain things in cereals and juices and different things like that. But the body doesn't process it the way it processes
Hmm.
natural. So you have natural nutrients in something. They take the natural out and then they add the unnatural, and that's supposed to be better.
In
Let's think
fact,
about that.
and when I was in my nutrition training, just to distinguish, um, enriched foods is when they do exactly what you just said. We process it, take all the nutrients out, and then we enrich it with the nutrients that we removed. But again, it's like eating a Snickers bar and taking a vitamin. The vitamin is a synthetic, you know, vitamin that's really not going to work in your body as well as the original. And then
Hmm.
you have foods that are fortified, and when you fortify foods, that's when you add nutrients to a food that is nutrient poor to make it a little healthier. But again, if you're adding nutrients that are, you know, artificially made, your body's like, what is that?
What is that?
So I'm right there with you. So that makes a lot of sense. Um, so how we think matters.
Yeah.
And yeah. And
And
so
so, so we're already nutrient deficient, right? Based upon what we're eating. And what we don't correlate is that because we're not getting enough saturated fat, enough cholesterol, enough vitamins and minerals and nutrients that the body actually needs from natural foods, right? That it can process, it affects our mentality.
mhm,
And so what I realized over the years is that a lot of people think they hear, right, with their emotions.
mhm,
They don't pause and process. They don't, um, they respond emotionally, right?
mhm,
And I was guilty of that. I used to do that a lot. And what we don't realize is the reason why our body is functioning that way. One is because of us not getting the proper nutrients, but two is also our environment, the things we listen to, what we associate with. And so, those are two key factors that we need to understand, that proper diet, which consists of animal products, right? Natural animal products will give you the benefit of, operating mentally. And I'll say one more thing. For me, I notice a shift mentally, right? At my job, people were complaining when I was on a plant-based diet that I was forgetting a lot. It was a bunch of stuff they were complaining about. I didn't correlate it to my diet, right? But it wasn't until I started incorporating uh, more meat-based foods into my diet that I noticed that I was getting sharper and sharper and
mhm,
sharper and sharper, to the point where people are now saying, "Hey, we're noticing a difference. What's
mhm,
changed?" To the point where I just got awarded something for improving a major component within, the company. Um, that didn't happen until I changed my diet.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's just good to hear that. And you've changed your diet and you're going to continue to work on yourself. So when it comes to my nest and rope, nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, the thoughts, the trauma, the relationships, the organisms and pollutants that can harm you. That's why I have lard on my face. It's a natural skincare product. And the emotion, our emotions and our life experiences. Where are you focusing your attention over the next 12 months?
So for me, I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing. Listening to positive uh, messages, affirmations, reading positive things, reading a lot of literature, medical literature, learning about the body, nutrition, and just trying to give that positive energy, that positive vibe, and staying away from toxic pollutant things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's man, that's our journey we're working on what's the best way to get the water in the house, put a purifier in. What about the air? Our cleaning products, we're starting to really start to think about detoxifying as much as possible and removing pollutants. So I appreciate that. So I have, your book in my hand. Again, just so happy that you're sharing messages of healing. How can my listeners get this book? How can they find you on YouTube?
Yeah, so there's two forms or two ways you can get my book. You can go to kevinthevisionary.com and download the PDF version, or you can go to Amazon and look up Kevin the Visionary, or you can look up How to Instantly Improve Your Health, and you can get the hard copy from Amazon. Um, YouTube, it's Kevin the Visionary. On Instagram, it's Kevin the Visionary. And so, yeah, you can find me on all those platforms, and you can get the information that you need for yourself, and you can share it with others.
Yeah, I love that. We appreciate you for having a vision, of healing. Obviously, we ask everybody to start healing yourself first, and then you'll have the knowledge and experience to heal others. So I really appreciate you coming to this episode of Protecting Your Nest podcast. Looking forward to being a guest on your YouTube channel in the near future so we can,
Yes, sir.
spread some more messages there as well. So thank you for being here today.
You're welcome.
Absolutely. So today, guys, we had another great guest. We appreciate all of his insights. We learned today that we all need to pause and recognize how we ended up where we are today. Was it our intentional actions or, just some randomness that occurred in our lives? No matter what the answer is, we all need to reassess if our intentional actions or even the randomness that has occurred in our lives is serving us. For me and my guests, through some experimentation, we found that the animal-based dietary pattern is the best for our bodies. We only ask that you do the same experiment so that your body can provide the answers you are seeking. So no matter where you land, we can only hope that by taking some time to reflect, you find the best path moving forward, a path of healing, a path of fulfillment, a path that moves you toward your life's purpose. So let's continue our walk towards wellness and use the insights of our guests to provide the foundation we need to be successful along our way. So I thank you again for coming to today's episode of the Protecting Your Nest podcast. And until the next episode, continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.